This video will inevitably include spoilers for stories in Final Fantasy XIV at varying levels of progression. I recently made a video ranking the hardest MSQ duties, and the comments section made me aware that I had neglected to consider certain other particularly difficult solo duties, primarily because I simply forgot. With that said, it appears that we have somewhat of a ranking of what would actually be considered the true hardest MSQ duty in the game. Once again, remembering that we don't actually count setting the difficulty to very easy and just steamrolling it that way. I will also talk a bit about other honorable mentions of difficult duties that I forgot to mention in the previous video. However, the primary focus is actually on the hardest one, according to a lot of players. So, let's just jump right to it. It isn't really a secret which fight it is. Worthy of his back, the fight with Venat. Overall, this fight includes a lot of somewhat scary telegraphed attacks that are a significant step up from any prior mandatory solo duty, and even includes attacks like this windmill situation, which I can best compare to an attack from Emerald Weapon, which isn't even in the MSQ at all. However, all of this is somewhat insignificant since you can just avoid being hit and just attack when it is safe. As far as I can tell, this is not a DPS race. There is not a hard enrage. Eventually, the final phase kicks in, which is a DPS check. It seems to be the case that the fight overall is scaled somewhat based on what role or job you're playing, to the point that I've been told that healers find it generally quite easy, and tanks often find it less difficult than DPS players. However, this DPS check goes as follows. Venat has a gauge to fill. It takes 7 orbs of any color to fill it. The red orbs move significantly faster than the blue orbs, making the blue orbs easier to kill before they reach Venat. The first wave is 4 blue orbs at 90-degree angles from each other, maximizing the amount of running melee jobs have to do. The second wave is 2 red orbs on opposite ends of the arena, again maximizing the running melee jobs have to do. However, assuming you can reach the first orb before they start moving, you can typically deal with both before they reach Venat. The third wave is a significant step up, because there are 6 blue orbs and 2 red orbs. It should be possible to deal with all of the blue orbs, however, if you decide to focus on the red orbs instead, it is very easy for many, if not all, of the blue orbs to sneak through as well. And for the final 4th wave, there are 5 blue orbs and 3 red orbs. Again, you might be able to deal with 1 red orb before they all start moving, but you probably need to focus on the blue orbs once things do start moving. What makes this entire DPS check so incredibly tough is that the red orbs move so fast that you have very little time to deal with them before they get soaked up by Venat anyway, even if you kill them in time. Combine this with the fact that there is a total of exactly 7 red orbs, meaning that you have to deal with every blue orb and at least 1 red orb to succeed. Some players incorrectly assume that the red orbs fill the bar faster, but as you can see in the footage, where I just so happen to let some red and some blue through, that every time it fills by 1/7 for every orb. So ultimately, all you have to do is prioritize in such a way that you get rid of as many orbs as possible, red or blue, it matters not. The amount of strategy necessary to overcome this particular mechanic says a lot about how difficult it actually is, and the only reason why I forgot about considering it was simply that in both of my goes on it, I beat it first try, even if by a hair. So I simply assumed I was being dumb. As you can see in the footage, I was not dealing with the orbs in an optimal way at all. A very fascinating thing that I noticed in the comments of the previous video on the subject is that a lot of players were stuck for a while on this fight, to say the least, because they refused to take the easy way out and set the difficulty down to easy or very easy. This was somewhat surprising to me, but in a good way. I just wanted to mention that is very commendable. And I imagine part of the reason why people do this is because by the construction of the MSQ, it's not like the game will easily offer you the opportunity to have another go later down the line, it's now or never for a lot of players. Another example of a duty that I neglected to mention is the Will of the Moon, which features a fight with Sadu of the Dothal. What makes this fight so difficult is, similar to Venat, that it has a surprising amount of telegraphs, but also because it has 2 DPS checks. The first one is when she attempts to cast Falling Dusk, where you have to beat these two Stellar Chulu before the cast is up. Overall, the DPS check appears to be pretty lenient. The second DPS check is at the end when she summons a meteor, putting a 60-second timer on you, while summoning more ads and just overwhelming amounts of attacks. Assuming you attack Sadu and not the ads, the DPS check is again very lenient. However, this is a massive step up in difficulty compared to what you'd have faced before this in the MSQ, as well as considering the fact that prior DPS checks to this have usually been in a group where you are not the only participant. Yet another example of a forgotten duty on my part was Return of the Bull, which features the solo duty version of the Lakshmi fight. The telegraphs themselves are not difficult. The amount of damage you have to do is not important. What makes this fight so hard is that you have to use a bonus action to prevent orbs from reaching civilians or otherwise people without the echo. And a single one making it through leads to instant failure. Now, with this many of them, that is probably understandably difficult. What makes it somewhat surprisingly harder is that there are enough for more than one person to handle. And that means you have to do your best to work with Endwalker, but he doesn't always stay on his side, and he doesn't use the ability nearly as fast and often as you do. So you often have to work double time to cover for him. It is just this one mechanic that makes it so hard, and also partly because the ability is an AoE, so you have to run around and make sure you hit as many as possible. Not too surprising that a gimmick fight that really pushes the gimmick to its limits would be very hard, as it isn't unusual for these kinds of fights to be a bit more lenient, to compensate for the fact that you are dealing with a gimmick that you haven't had before. A pair of duties that were also somewhat quietly snuck past were the two solo duties against Ranjit, both the one as the player character and especially the one as Thancred. The one as the player character, A Feast of Lies, I would think is the easier of the two and is similar to the other duties I mentioned, filled with a lot of difficult to dodge telegraphs. It also finishes with a DPS check where you have to kill 4 rather weak ads and then kill Ranjit, presumably from around 15% HP, which can be difficult if you aren't used to maximizing your damage. Are you seeing a pattern in these fights that are considered particularly hard? Yes, one big part is DPS checks. The one with Thancred, Full Steam Ahead, is generally about using your heal button and your defensive cooldown smartly and then gradually wearing Ranjit down. But at certain points in the fight, it takes a turn, which is what makes me deem it as sort of a spectacle fight. That doesn't make it simple, but the fact of the matter is that there is one and only one way to win this fight, and that is using the fancy button right. And you have to do this a few times, with a final time where Ranjit gets crazy with the telegraphs. Although it does seem like he is almost intentionally missing. The key thing that makes this fight harder is that the spectacle of the fight means that you don't really have the chance to fail very much, which means that it feels like you have to be perfect in a way, which is very similar to the Lakshmi fight. The final one I felt was worth mentioning is Escape from Castrum's Centri. At the time in the MSQ where this duty comes up, it sure does introduce a lot of gimmicks. At the start, you have to release Urianger and Papalimo, which I have been told some people didn't even realize they had to press the bombs and not the NPCs to do. And throughout the duty, you have to deal with these machines that can only be killed after you kill a nearby generator. If you miss that text message where they explain this the first time, then good luck. You know how much I hate important text messages. Compared to the rest of the duties on this particular list, this is a lot tamer, but it does have some similarities with the Lakshmi one and the Thancred one, in that you need to do something super specific or you just won't proceed, which can become an impossible thing to pass if you just don't see it. So, do you feel I missed some more difficult solo duties, or maybe you feel there's a solo duty even harder than worthy of his back? Maybe I talked about them in the previous list, or maybe I missed some. Regardless, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, assuming that MSQ solo duties actually are adjusted based on what role you play, they would have to for a DPS check to matter to a DPS job while still being doable for a healer. That means that solo duties would always be easiest to accomplish for a healer, especially for something like a scholar who could probably overcome all healing needs with their pet, maximizing their own damage. And assuming that every single job has their own adjustment for each solo duty, Scholar would probably be better than the other healers at this for the same reason. Simple attack rotation, check. Not really any reason to heal yourself, check. Able to attack while running, check. What's not to like?